What is up, everyone? Welcome into another edition of our NBA DFS DraftKings Picks videos. This time for Friday, February 25th. We've had roughly a week off after the All-Star break. Pretty terrible weekend, if you ask me. That dunk contest was, iffy at best. Did you happen to watch it?
No, I
You
actually
lucked out.
did not.
I mean, it was so bad, but there were a couple cool dunks. I don't know. I feel like you lose a lot of the, I don't know how to put it, but like seeing a dude dunk on his first attempt, fantastic. Seeing a dude dunk on his fifth attempt, I don't, at that point, I don't care anymore. You know what I mean? It just, after
Yeah,
you know what they're doing, if they don't hit the dunk and like now you're just guessing, you know exactly what's coming, just not as impressive.
agreed. Yeah.
Then you had, Karl Anthony Towns drilling threes for the 3-point. But let's shift into this. First off, if you enjoy this video, go ahead, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. You can turn on notifications by clicking the little bell. Comment anything you want below. Spike and I will try to be in throughout the day to answer any questions that you have. Also, if you're not in the DFS Karma Discord, this has not been announced anywhere besides there at the moment, but this will be my last podcast. I am stepping away from DFS Karma to go off into a different endeavor. It's a startup company called Playable. My brother is one of the founders, essentially. Going in with him on that. So that is where I'll be heading, but I will still be around in the Discord, which you can get in for free at chatdfs.com. And I will be publishing articles for Bet Karma. So not completely rid of me, just on the DFS Karma side of things. No one needs to worry. We have Spike absolutely destroying literally every sport that he plays. We have plenty of other guys that are just doing fantastic jobs as well. So if you do want to pick up our core plays package, head to dfskarma.com, click on the pricing tab. You can find all of our packages there. What you get with those is core plays, cheat sheets. You get our premium content, you get projections, you get into our premium Discord as well. I just noticed that the little ticker says NASCAR. That should not say NASCAR, that should say NBA, because that is where you can find our NBA packages as well. But let's quick jump into injury news and then break down the slate at each of the 5 positions. For the San Antonio Spurs, Romeo Langford and Joshua Primo, both questionable. On the opposite side, Kristaps Porzingis out once again. Thomas Bryant questionable. Mike Muscala and Lou Dort, I believe at the moment, are questionable. Looks like they may be closer to doubtful, but nothing has been confirmed. Then you have Kenrich Williams and Ty Jerome, both questionable as well. On the opposite side, Chris Duarte is questionable for Indiana, but you have Goga Bitadze, Malcolm Brogdon, and Isaiah Jackson all probable to play in this game. Fred VanVleet, questionable for Toronto. Nick Richards and Jalen McDaniels, both doubtful for the Charlotte Hornets. Mo Wagner out for Orlando. Markieff Morris is out for Miami, along with Victor Oladipo. He's getting relatively close to a return. I think he's out a few more games, but should be back at least relatively soon. RJ Barrett and Nerlens Noel, both questionable for the New York Knicks. Derrick Rose is doubtful. James Harden will make his Philly debut. We were kind of talking about what happens between Harden and Joel Embiid prior to getting on here. We'll probably discuss that when we go over the 5 positions, but Harden is in for tonight. Marquise Chris is doubtful for Dallas. Reggie Bullock and Trey Burke are both questionable. Rudy Gay, doubtful for Utah. Jared Butler is out for them. Cam Payne, I believe, could return tonight. He is currently questionable. Obviously, Chris Paul will continue to miss plenty of time. Then you have Avery Bradley out for the Los Angeles Lakers, and LeBron James is actually questionable at this point. So that'll be pretty big news. We can shift over to the position by position, obviously starting at point guard. Spike, what do you have for us here?
Yeah. Right at the top, Luka Doncic, 11,800. Still not enough for him. He's more or less a one-man show right now. I guess you could say Jalen Brunson helps a little bit, but this dude's like either triple doubling or coming on the edge of it almost every game. And since there's no Kristaps anymore, and I mean it more or less all falls on him. He's under 12K. He puts up similar numbers, if not better than Joker does, and he's under 12K. So I mean, there's not really much more to say. I mean, it's not a great matchup against the Jazz, but at the same time, I feel like he's matchup proof at this point. They need him to win games, and that's that. I mean, as you were just talking about Harden, there he is at 10,900. I probably won't touch him unless you're going to be doing a lot of max multi entering. I think he's fine for tournaments, but at that price, I don't trust him. Especially because this is his first game alongside Embiid, and we kind of have an idea of how it's going to be played out, but until I actually see it, I'm not going to touch it. I'd rather see how it plays out first. Right underneath him is Gente Murray. He's getting up there in price, 10,800, but you know he can easily pay that off. He averages 50 fantasy points a game. No Derek White there now still. So, I mean, a lot of that offense, he's shouldering still. It's really not a bad matchup against the Wizards. I really don't see who's going to slow him down. So I really like him there. You go down some more. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is at 9K against the Pacers. It's a pretty good matchup. It's his second game back. I'm not 100% on what he did last night, but that's just too cheap for the upside he possesses. And if Lu Dort is out again, his usage rate takes a nice bump with him out. And again, it's just too cheap for his upside. You go down some more. Cole Anthony at 7K against a terrible Houston Rocket defense is something I'm very interested in. I like this game overall because it's two bad teams playing each other, and when that happens, I kind of like both sides because you know there's not going to be any defense, so there's going to be a lot of chances to score. And 7K is just too cheap for Cole Anthony, who in the beginning of the year we saw him putting up 60 fantasy point games. I think it's possible if this game shoots out that could happen again. On the other side of that, Kevin Porter Jr. at 6,700 is just too cheap against a Magic defense that we're also not scared of. So I have no issues there. And then if you want to save a little bit, I have no problem going to like Raul Neto at 4,700. No Beal, no Kristaps, so he's going to be forced into bigger minutes yet again. He probably starts. And, I mean, if he puts up 25 points, he pays off that tag right there. That's probably about it for me at point guard.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think you're on. For me, I prefer Luka Doncic than probably DeJounte Murray and then James Harden if you're looking at the very top. The only thing that I kind of like about Harden is the matchup against Minnesota. Obviously, plenty of points to be had in that game. The big issue is that you don't really know how they're going to play Harden and Embiid. The most logical thing, I think, in terms of the way that I would be thinking is that there's one of two ways that they play it. One, you know, they both start the game, then one of the two gets pulled relatively early. The other one plays when he comes out, they put the other one in. So at all times, essentially, they have one of Embiid or Harden on the court. Or two, they use Harden to really space the floor, give Embiid more room down low. And I think there's advantages to both. I think that in terms of fantasy, you don't want them on the floor together because both are so good with the ball in their hands. And, you know, it's just really difficult for two players. There's almost no chance that two players in the same game are going to hit close to 11, 12K price tags. It's just almost impossible. So if you're playing one of the two, pick one, move along. Don't play both of them together. Obviously, I don't even know if you would be able to create a reasonable lineup doing that. But I prefer Doncic and Murray to Harden at their current prices. I think as you move down, Tyrese Halliburton at 8,800 is just too cheap for what he's doing with Indiana. Very clearly, as you can tell from his media interviews, has a chip on his shoulder about Sacramento getting rid of him. He really wanted to turn that franchise around. They basically gave up on him in favor of De'Aaron Fox, which I feel like most people kind of believe is relatively weird, which, I think both are good players. I think, Halliburton's probably the guy that you would want to build around more. But it is what it is. I do think that he comes with a tremendous upside, even at 8,800. Shifting down, the one guy that I don't really want to say, but I'll throw it out there specifically for tournaments, is Reggie Jackson. He has been on a tear. He's 7,600. The price tag's ridiculous, but he gets the matchup against the Lakers. They've been atrocious against point guards the entire season. Reggie Jackson has actually been playing extremely well. Don't trust his minutes, whatsoever. If you look in his last game, obviously a massive blowout. He only played 26. He did drop 40 fantasy points in that game, though. Prior to that, they were actually relatively steady. I feel like obviously the 26 had to do with the blowout factor. So I don't know. High upside option just comes with a ton of risk as well. So that's kind of how I would outline him there. You nailed Cole Anthony. I think he's a really good play. I'm going to love a ton of guys in the Houston-Orlando game, both sides. But Cole Anthony is one that definitely sticks out. As you continue down, Patrick Beverley is still a little too cheap at 5,200. I don't necessarily love him in the matchup against Philly, but I do think that it's relatively fine if you want to use him. I don't really have too many issues with it. And then the guy that's obviously mispriced, assuming he plays, would be Cameron Payne. If he's starting, you would expect. I guess he hasn't played in roughly a month, so they may give him limited minutes. But even if he only plays 20, 25 minutes, the price tag's too low. If they force him into bigger minutes, because obviously no Chris Paul, then 4,100 is just a ridiculous price tag if he's playing like 30 minutes. I do think that he's going to be one of the better plays on the slate, assuming we get news that he is starting. We can shift over to shooting guard now. Who are you looking at here?
I think the most obvious, one, and he's sitting right there at the top, is Devin Booker. His price went up $400 from last night, but I think it's irrelevant with Chris Paul out. He's gonna have the ball in his hands some more, and yeah, it's gonna have a little to do with if Payne is in or not. But even if he is, Booker's still gonna handle the ball more. I think 9,200 is just too cheap. It's a pretty good matchup against the Pelicans, and when Booker gets going, it's just really hard to stop him. He can also add peripherals on any given night. I mean, he's not going to triple double by any means, but he can get you like 5 assists and 5 rebounds, maybe a steal or two. And that's probably my favorite play at shooting guard, to be honest with you. But if you move down some more, I mean, I have no problems going to like a Donovan Mitchell or an Anthony Edwards. Not really high on my player pool, but I definitely think they're worth a mention. Someone I'm really interested in is Gary Trent for 6,500 against the Hornets. Any team that plays the Hornets, you kind of want some kind of exposure to them, because it's just a pace up spot for every team, especially when you get a team like the Raptors that really likes to play their starters 35 plus minutes. I think 6,500 is too cheap for him. If his shot's falling, he could drop 40 fantasy points in any night. The problem I have with him is he's really scoring dependent. He's not going to add a lot of assists or rebounds or any other peripherals. So if his shot's not falling, he might not get you there. So it's a little more of a tournament play for me. You go down some more, going back to this game, Jalen Suggs at 6K is just a little too cheap for me. Just a terrible defense in Houston, and if Cole Anthony is not going to get there, then Suggs will. I think they can both have good games. On the other side of that game, I think Eric Gordon's way too cheap right now. He's at 4K. I think he missed the last couple games, and before that, he just wasn't playing very good. But we all know that, like, if his 3-shot is on, he can put up points in a hurry. And at 4K, you really don't need much for him to pay off that tag. And then I guess right underneath him, Lonnie Walker's been seeing more minutes. I think the Spurs are trying to figure out how to fill that Derek White void. And I don't think they've quite done it yet. They're still doing auditions, but I think Lonnie Walker has been playing really well as of late. So we could and should probably see him in the starting lineup again. Or I'm sorry, he wasn't in the starting lineup, but he's been playing over 25 minutes, and at 3,900, there's not much not to like. He's I think over zero point 0.8 DraftKings points per minute, with a good matchup against the Wizards too. But other than that, you already said everyone else that I wanted to say at point guard for shooting guard, so that's probably about it.
Yeah, I think you nailed the position really well. Devin Booker very clearly is probably going to be a popular play. I don't see why he wouldn't be. On the other side, CJ McCollum at 8,600 is just too cheap. He's consistently dropped 50 plus with New Orleans. His role is massive. He's taken 24 plus shots in 3 of his last 4. Only didn't against Toronto. He still scored 42 fantasy points in that game. Really was super efficient, but they won by 30, so he wasn't really needed. I completely agree with Gary Tran Jr. He's actually one of my favorite plays on the entire slate. And essentially one reason for that is, one, if Fred VanVleet is playing, Charlotte is really bad against shooting guards, specifically shooting guards that can score. Obviously, that's exactly what Gary Trent does. If Fred VanVleet is out, Trent generally shifts over to point guard, and then they obviously run the offense through Pascal Siakome. But the big thing is that Trent then sees just a massive boost in his usage. So he'll get, more than enough shots to cover value, I think, anyway. So I do think that he's a really good play. Buddy Hield is taking on a much larger role. Minutes are locked in. He's throwing up, sometimes 15 threes a game for Indiana. So I do think that he's completely fine against Oklahoma City, who, I'm not overly concerned about their defense whatsoever. You talked about Jalen Suggs. I completely agree. Jalen Green is another guy that I think in that game is relatively fine. Comes with plenty of upside, also a relatively risky option as well. You nailed the kind of salary relief players. I think that Eric Gordon and Lonnie Walker are both really good. The two that I'll add to that, and this kind of is dependent on RJ Barrett, or I guess Derrick Rose actually being ruled out as well. He's currently doubtful. But Emmanuel quickly can really score points in a hurry. He dropped 35 in 21 minutes in his last game. When his shot's falling, he comes with a lot of upside. But the other guy at 4,100 is Quentin Grimes. Really good three-point shooter. He's been playing really big minutes with RJ Barrett out prior to the break. Not always dropping elite fantasy points, but in 2 of his last 3, he scored 35 plus. At 4,100, what else could you possibly want for that? So I would take the risk of him scoring, the 15 for the chance that he drops close to 40, right?
Yeah, agreed.
So I think shifting over to small forward here, I'm pretty sure that's it for shooting guard. Who are you looking at small forward?
An atrocious position yet again. I mean, I have no issues if you want to play Jimmy Butler. I really don't like the spot for him. It's paced down. Knicks aren't great at defense, but they're not terrible either. So I got no issues going to him. I think the first guy I'm really looking at is Miles Bridges. 7,800 gets a pretty good matchup against Toronto that just really aren't that good at guarding the small forward position. We've seen Miles Bridges put up like 55, 60 fantasy point nights. So we know the upside is there. It's just too cheap for someone with that kind of potential. The next guy I was going to mention, you already said, who was Buddy Hield. I really like him here. If you want to go to the Hornets some more, I think Kelly Oubre's price is finally at a point where we can play him again. 6K. I'll probably be playing off the bench again, which is kind of where we like him, because once he goes into that starting lineup, his usage just kind of disappears. So 6K from there, I really like. On the other side of that game, Scotty Barnes at 5,800. I have no issues with that whatsoever. I like it. It's kind of cheap. He has no real ceiling that we've seen, but he consistently puts up 30 to 35 fantasy points. And if he's under 6K, I don't mind that whatsoever. And then underneath that, I like Cam Johnson at 4,800 against the Pelicans. We saw him start last night. It's kind of shocked that they didn't start Holiday. Maybe we see something different tonight. Again, that depends on the Cameron Payne news. But if Cam Payne's out, I mean, I really like Cam Johnson here. He can light it up behind the arc. He can get you assists, rebounds, blocks, and steals. Under 5K, I really like him there. And then I'll also throw in OG on Nunaby at 6,200. Just really like all these Raptors against this Hornets team. But that's probably about it for me. I think a couple of players that we said at shooting guard are also small forward eligible, like Lonnie Walker and Eric Gordon. So I have no issues plugging them in here too.
Yeah, I think the big thing is that the guys that we talked about at shooting guard are small forward eligible because the position is just so bad. I think you broke it down well. I agree that Miles Bridges is the top option if you're spending up. I think that realistically, you probably then drop down. I think Franz Wagner is a relatively solid option. The guy that, in my opinion, is just a little bit too cheap is Devin Vasile. Former first-round pick. I mean, still really young. He was really raw when he came into the NBA, came with a lot of upside, a lot of scoring upside. We've now seen him drop 30-plus fantasy points in, I believe, 4 of his last 5, also getting significantly more minutes. I think one of the big reasons that they traded away Derek White was because they do want Vasile to play bigger minutes, on top of Lonnie Walker as well. I feel like they kind of want to, more or less get to know what they have with Walker so they can kind of decide what to do with him. But Vasile I see as probably a relatively big part of their young core moving forward. So should continue to play bigger minutes. Only 5,000, which is just a little bit too cheap. So relatively solid option there. As you shift down, it looked like last night Jay Crowder was a really big beneficiary of Chris Paul being out. He kind of took on a bigger role. He had, I guess, the whole team, oddly enough, outside of DeAndre Ayton. I mean, Ayton had 8 rebounds, but basically everyone on the floor was rebounding. It was really weird. I think like all of the starters ended with 5+ boards or something. So could be an outlier game. Crowder could be taking on a bigger role. Regardless, he's only 4,600 and he was essentially hitting value prior to the break anyway. So I do believe that he's a relatively solid option for the price tag. Outside of that, though, there's probably not too many people that I'm adding down low here. If you want to say someone like Chuma Okeke, fine. I don't necessarily trust him, but 4,700 isn't a bad price tag to throw at him. So I think that that's relatively okay, but not really my favorite option there. Truthfully, that's about it. I agree. You kind of threw OG and Nunaby on at the end. I'll throw him on at the end as well. I think he's fine if you just want to use him, but not one of my favorite plays on the slate. I do think that the situation is very solid, though. It's just that there's other Toronto guys that I'm more likely to use than him, and it's not like I'm going to deck out Toronto. So Anunoby probably doesn't make it for me. But over to power forward. Break down what you have here.
Sitting at the top, it's really dependent on that RJ Barrett news, but Julius Randle without Barrett under 10K, sign me up. It's not a good matchup, and I really don't care. Julius Randle sees a huge usage bump without RJ Barrett. That's how big of a factor that RJ Barrett is. So keep your eyes on that, because if Barrett's out, I really want a lot of Julius Randle for under 10K. Underneath him, you got Pascal Siakam at 9,300. Doesn't get much better than this. You kind of really hope that Fred VanVleet is in, so Siakam can actually play down low, because the Hornets are just terrible against the power forward and center position, which is more or less what he's going to be playing if VanVleet is in. And 9,300 is just too cheap. I think he played him a couple of games back, and he had a really good game. There's just not much I don't like about this at all. probably my favorite play at power forward. You move down some more. I have no issues going to someone like Marcus Morris at 6,400 against the Lakers. They just don't have a good defense at all. And if Marcus Morris is getting hot behind that line, I'd rather take a shot on him versus a Reggie Jackson for, 1,200 less, 1,300 less. Underneath him is Jayshawn Tate at 5,700. It's a good matchup against the Orlando Magic, and no one's going to be on this guy because he's had like maybe two or three like really good games, and the rest are just kind of mediocre. But I could definitely see him having a really good game here against the Magic, with them having their hands full with Christian Wood down low. At the same price though, O'Shea Brissett gets a matchup against the Thunder, and this guy has just kind of been on a tear since the Sabonis trade. His price is getting up there, but he's been averaging 30 to 35 fantasy point games for like the last 3 or 4 games before the break. So under 6K, I don't mind that whatsoever. Then I guess if you're trying to save a little bit, I think Jared Vanderbilt's too cheap at 4,600. Not a stupendously great matchup, but he gets a lot of rebounds, and he can put up those points in the paint pretty quickly. So it's really not super unlikely that he can double fast here. The only big problem I have with him is he doesn't like to keep his hands to himself. He doesn't like to play nice. So if he gets into foul trouble early, that might hurt you and make it more of a riskier tournament play. But I have no issues doing that if you want to save money here. But that's probably about it for me.
Yeah, I think you outlined that well. At the top, the top 3 guys, all really good options. Julius Randle, if RJ Barrett is out, just because of the pure volume. I don't like the matchup against Miami. I don't think literally anyone will try to convince you that's a good matchup, but you're looking for volume here. Pascal Siakam, specifically, as you said, if Fred VanVleet is in, that would shift Siakam more to center versus power forward. Or really, if VanVleet's out and they still announce Siakam as the center, it's just generally they shift him to power forward and then they start someone like Khem Birch at center. But, whoever's playing center against Charlotte is really who gets the biggest bump. And then Kyle Kuzma without Kristaps Porzingis, obviously no Dinwiddie, no Beal. He's coming off of a less than 20 fantasy point performance. So a lot of people burned by that, and they probably won't like it. But he does get a good matchup against San Antonio, who obviously pushes the pace. They don't have a good defense. So I think that Kuzma is a really, really good option tonight. Then you obviously have Wendell Carter Jr. I don't need to try to convince you to play guys against Houston. It's very clear that's what you're doing. Like, Houston's defense is atrocious. It's a good play. Kendall Johnson is way too cheap. Washington isn't necessarily atrocious against power forwards in terms of fantasy, but they do allow them to score a ton. And if you look at any of Keldon Johnson's biggest games, what happens is he needs to score to have those massive ceiling games. He's not a dude that's going to go out there and grab 15 rebounds in a night. It just literally will never happen. I think his season high, I guess he got up to 14 at one point, but rarely above roughly 7. So he really needs to score actual points where he comes in and has the really good fantasy games. And I think that he can do that against Washington tonight. So very reasonable option there. You talked to Jayshawn Tate. I agree with that. I think he's a good option. I was going back and forth on O'Shea Brissett myself. The big thing is they're so much healthier now with like Goga Bitadze and Isaiah Jackson are both back. And I don't think that Brissett necessarily loses minutes, but I think that his minutes are less secure to the point where, if Jackson catches fire, I could see them giving him run. If Bitadze is playing well, they could give him run, and Brissett could lose out on it. So same with Jalen Smith as well. But, Jalen Smith's not a guy that's going to go out there and get 35 minutes in a game. But Indiana's whole front court is like a little jumbled to the point where all of them come with tremendous upside. And like, if you hit on the right guy, it could be a tournament winner. The problem is good luck guessing who that right guy is. So outside of that, I don't necessarily know if there's too many cheaper guys that like we kind of talked about a few. I guess if Thomas Bryant is out, Rui Hachimura makes a really good play. He played 27 minutes in their final game before break, scored 25 fantasy points, and he's only 4,000. I think if Thomas Bryant plays, though, then Hachimura, his minutes are going to come down the same way that they did before. A lot of guys splitting time in the front court, but if Bryant is out, I do think that Hachimura is a fine play. Shifting to center, we now have Joel Embiid at almost 12,000, but James Harden in town. Joel Embiid probably going to lose a bit of value. Now watch what's going to happen now, because we sat here and said this, is they're going to go out there and Embiid and Harden are both going to drop like 80 fantasy points in the craziest game that we've ever seen. And then we're going to be sitting on here like, oh, how did we not see that coming? And we projected that only one of them could play well together. But we'll see. We'll see what ends up happening. At center, what do you have, or who are you looking at, I guess?
I'll tell you what, if that happens, I'll do something weird. I'll tell you that much. I have no issues if you want to take Embiid over Harden. It's just hard to justify that price when you can get other guys for around that price, if not cheaper, with probably better upside, and they don't have James Harden on their team. Underneath him, I think Rudy Gobert gets a really good matchup against the Dallas Mavericks. 8,400 is a little cheap. I'm a little worried about his minutes. They're a little inconsistent. He's still coming back from the injury. I mean, they did just have a week off, but it's definitely something to monitor for sure. You can also plug in Pascal Siakome here. He does have the center eligibility if you want. But underneath Gobert, you have Christian Wood at 7,900. Just a little too cheap for this matchup against Orlando. I don't see Mo Bamba or Carter really stopping him too much. And a majority of their offense kind of runs through Wood. He'll have his hands on the ball at some point in time through a lot of their possessions. So I really like him there. You go down again. I know you had him last night and he didn't do too well, but I think DeAndre Ayton again at 6,800 is a pretty good play against the Pelicans. I think it's just a little too cheap for him. This guy can put up doubles relatively easily, and I think after he burned so many people last night, that he'll probably come in a little lower owned. Underneath him, I think Ivica Zubac gets a pretty good matchup against the Lakers. No Anthony Davis, so there's really no one who's going to stop him down there. As long as he can stay out of foul trouble, 5K is just way too cheap. This guy can get you rebounds, blocks, steals, points. He's one of my favorite cheaper plays on the entire slate. And then I have no issues going to someone like Jakob Poeltl at 7,300. Washington isn't really good against bigs, especially if Thomas Bryant is out. He should have a field day down there. But yeah, I'm looking at more of the middle range for tonight. I guess I'll throw in one more. I don't think Jonas Valanciunas is a terrible option either. He's just too cheap. You know, we've seen him be 9,500, 9,600, and yeah, McCollum's there, but this guy can still collect a bunch of rebounds, double really easily. And if he stays out of foul trouble, can see upwards of 30 minutes. That's probably about it for me there.
Yeah. I mean, center is usually the position where you're like, oh, absolutely, spend up. I don't think that you do that tonight. And by that, I mean, I'm probably not going above 10,000. Obviously, we're not loaded with options above 10,000, but Pascal Siakam, very clearly. I agree with Rudy Gobert. I just don't like the fact that he's not locked into massive minutes. I'm guessing at some point that's going. I'm assuming now that comes back because he had off for quite some time. Then he returned from injury, saw minutes in the 20s in both of his first two games back. Should be completely healthy now, and getting ready over the break. So I feel like that's relatively fine. But I prefer Siakam. I guess 900 is quite a bit, but I guess you can drop down below. Christian Wood is a really good option. Jakob Poeltl and DeAndre Ayton. I like both of them quite a bit. I have no problems going right back to DeAndre Ayton. You have to have a short memory in betting and DFS. Ayton didn't perform last night. Who cares? I have to look into all the advanced stuff and kind of see what happened. Maybe it was just an off game. Who knows? But it's a good spot again. And, DeAndre Ayton's found plenty of success without Chris Paul on the floor this season. I'm not really going to go away from it just because he had one bad game. Continuing down, one of the weirder things happening in Charlotte is that they're playing Mason Plumlee and Montrezl Harrell together. And it, not just playing them together, but playing like massive minutes of them together. Not every night, PJ Washington's done his thing where he gets big minutes too, but Harrell seems locked into the big minutes. They seem ready to just completely feed him. He's only 5,600. That's way too cheap. I think PJ Washington at 5,300 is also too cheap, as well as Mason Plumlee. The problem is only 2 of those 3 are going to play bigger minutes. We already more or less can pencil in Harrell for his at this point. So you're kind of doing a little guessing game between PJ Washington and Mason Plumlee. I had a pick. I think that Washington is the better player for this type of a matchup because I don't expect Toronto. Well, Toronto can't really go that big. So Washington makes more sense to me. But of the trio, Montrezl Harrell is the clear option. I think that Ivica Zubac is completely fine, but also on the same team, Isaiah Hartenstein makes a really good option. 4,400, and his minutes are far from safe. But in his last game, he dropped over 40 fantasy points in 25 minutes. He's always a really good point per minute player. He struggles with fouls because he goes after so many blocks and such. But at 4,400, he is the type of guy that can kind of really, really break a slate depending, more or less on the minutes that he gets. And then I will say Indiana gets such a good matchup against Oklahoma City. It's just I don't know who's getting the big minutes. So I'll probably wait until I see what their lineup looks like. And then whoever is starting at center is most likely a guy that I will be interested in. I just don't want to lock that in now because I don't know, 1, who's going to be starting at center, and 2, I kind of need to try to figure out whether those minutes would then be safe or not. But that's more or less what we're looking at here. Plenty of options for everyone to choose from. Once again, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed it, go ahead and give us a thumbs up. Drop any comments you have below. We will be there to answer throughout the day. DFSkarma.com for all of our stuff, and good luck tonight.